that physical healing doesn't come about? Is Jesus playing favorites by chance, or how do we
No,
balance it?
he doesn't play favorites. And I think the other thing is sometimes the healing that we're wanting is not the healing that God gives us.
Okay, that's
He gives
one
us
way.
what we need, not always what we want.
I think the audio is me, so I'm going to switch over. Okay, that's well said. What I kind of came up with, and I think the lesson kind of alludes to that, is that spiritual healing always happens.
Always.
Always happens.
And I think too often when people go to God for healing, they're wanting that physical healing.
Okay.
Some physical ailment or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. It was a custom in their day, though, to view physical ailments as somehow being wrong with God, right? So by Jesus not only physically healing, by him physically healing them, which I don't recall any time that somebody came to him when he was here on earth and they didn't have their physical malady, whatever it was, healed. But it was speaking to a larger reality because they, in that culture and that time, they equated the physical with the spiritual so closely. They put that together. So, but this goes on, and we'll move on to Sunday's lesson, and I think that we'll explore that idea a little more. Also, those that are on Facebook, I am watching the Facebook feed, so be sure to leave your comments there, and I will certainly try to work those in as we have our discussion this morning. So, the lesson focuses on rest, speaking of Sunday's lesson, and it focuses on the physical sickness. Sometimes people's bodies aren't well. They might have a test pending. They went to the doctor, they got a test pending, they have a diagnosis maybe looming, they lie awake and they worry at night. Mm-hmm. What has been helpful for you to find peace when facing health problems? And I'm asking you on Facebook as well as Sandy, what has been helpful to you to find peace when facing health problems? Sandy?
I think more than anything to take the focus off of me. Turn it over to God.
Okay.
Let him worry about it. He's got it more under control than I ever could.
For sure.
So for me to lay there and just worry and fret about it is only going to make it worse.
Yeah.
It's a proven fact that people that have a very positive outlook, that people that have a prayerful life, heal better.
Okay. I would say that's true. But then it goes back to that question. Some people don't get that physical healing. So with that, what is not helpful then? If you're dealing with a physical illness, some kind of sickness, what proves not to be helpful?
I think to constantly dwell on it.
Okay, dwelling on it.
Yeah.
I've heard of stories, and these are anecdotal, I get that, but I've heard of people that they got a severe diagnosis, name the illness. I don't remember the illness they had, but they were very depressed. Lesson talks about this, right? Mm-hmm. Very down, very low. And somebody kind of helped them by helping them change their perspective. We talked about this last week, right? Changing their perspective to the situation. And they never did get well, but they impacted so many people around them by handling this devastating illness with such grace, with such loving care, and it turned their whole attitude, that you could say that the light of heaven was shining from them, even though they knew that eventually it wasn't turning around for them, right? Mm-hmm. So having faith despite the circumstances, and understanding that God knows the best for us, and we have to trust him with that, right? So,
Yeah, doesn't the Bible even talk about, I want to say, wasn't it Paul that had something that he praised God for it later?
yes, yes.
I can't remember what his malady was exactly, but
He asked for it to be removed, but it was never removed.
exactly.
So again, seeing the larger picture, we talked about that last week a little bit, seeing the larger picture, seeing where you fit in there, and
Yes.
testing. Obviously, we go through trials for testing, but trials produce patience.
And you know, it seems to be that the ones who totally go the inward focus, they are not a blessing to themselves or to anyone else. And they're so focused on self, it's almost like they can't release it to God.
Yeah,
You know what I'm saying?
yeah,
Whereas, like the person you're talking about, when you do that, what a blessing they've become to others.
for sure.
My aunt, she died of cancer. This has been years ago. But right up until she died, she was more concerned about the ones that were having to come and take care of her than she ever was about herself.
Right, always others focused.
Yes.
Right? It's very easy. I'm not going to doubt it for anybody out there that might be dealing with a severe illness or sickness.
Exactly.
But it's very easy to focus in on self when things are heavy, like your aunt and cancer and that sort of thing. But I think that relying upon God and trusting him with the outcome,
Mm-hmm.
right? Never losing focus,
Absolutely.
that it's not necessarily about physical life here on earth, but it's your ultimate eternal destination that God's concerned about.
Exactly.
So,
And here on earth, we are never going to get past these illnesses, and whether it be a spiritual illness or a mental illness, or we're always going to have those.
spiritual illness can heal and prepare us for heaven, but obviously sometimes the physical won't go away till we come back in, or when Christ comes back and we get new bodies, right?
But you hear people say, oh, if there's a God, why would they allow this or that to happen to, say, a baby or a small child? And, you know, I think we need to remember we live in a sinful world.
Yes.
And we're going to have all of those things. And it makes us all the more eager for Jesus to come.
For sure, for sure. It gives us something to look forward to. Radana makes a comment. She says, I'm sure my MS is not a surprise to anyone. It's important not to take it out on those who care for you. Again, what's not helpful? That's a great answer to that question. In other words, lashing out that those are trying to help you, your loved ones even, taking it out on other people, it doesn't help the situation, right? So thank you for that. So I want to look at the fourth and fifth paragraphs there on Sunday's lesson. And it reads, actually, I skipped over something.
Okay.
Let's look at Mark chapter 2. The lesson gives us Mark chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. Mark chapter 2, verses 1 through 4.
Okay.
Sandy, if you can read that for us, please.
Chapter 2, verses 1 through 4 in Mark. And again, he entered Capernaum after some days, and it was heard that he was in the house. Immediately, many gathered together so that there was no longer room to receive them, not even near the door, and he preached the word to them. Then they came to him, bringing a paralytic who was carried by 4 men. And when they could not come near him because of the crowd, they uncovered the roof where he was. So when they had broken through, they let down the bed on which the paralytic was lying.
Okay, so we're focusing here on the paralytic and being let down through the roof, and Christ did heal him physically, but what did he do first? He forgave him of his sins, right?
Right. I thought it was real interesting, too. Not only the paralytic was healed in this respect, but they all were because of their faith.
Right. But again, it goes back to this idea that in Christ's day, he was viewed as being somehow wrong with God, not
Right.
right with God, right? So
Either him or his parents. Somewhere down the line, somebody must have sinned, they
right.
thought.
And they had this very odd cause and effect type of mentality, right? So moving into the third or fourth and fifth paragraph there on Sunday's lesson says, for the paralytic in this story, it was an obvious case. We get the background in Desire of Ages, page 267 through 271. The paralytic had done some things that he wasn't proud of in his life. His sinful life caused this sickness, and the spiritual experts drew a straight line from cause and effect. He had brought this disease upon himself by his sins, and there was no cure. This attitude can be very typical. We often seem to be obsessed with who did it.
Yeah.
If some crime has been committed, someone must pay for it. If there's an accident somewhere, someone should be sued. But assigning blame does not bring healing or wholeness to the one who is sick. So again, thinking about God's original design.
But you know, even today, we still have that same thing. You will have, say, somebody that comes up with something, and they'll say, why didn't my parents tell me about that? Or why didn't somebody warn me? You know,
right.
There's always going to be that blame.
It starts very young,
It
if I
does.
remember correctly.
It does.
It's been a while, but it starts young. We have this idea of fairness, and that somebody's responsible, and those that might be a little more narcissistic might have not grown out of that, blaming somebody else. It's not my fault, right?
Right.
I felt like the lesson did a great job here of pointing out the fallacy, really, of the human imperial system. Because even as grown adults, I pointed to somebody gets in an accident. Well, somebody's to blame, right? Whose fault is it? And so it really falls flat when it comes to understanding the spiritual aspect. So somebody needs to be blamed, they need to have an excuse, they need somebody to punish. And it really does infect our thinking, even about maybe health issues. But we're not really talking only about health issues. What about the cause of sin?
Mm-hmm.
Is the problem with sin the exact same thing?
Sure it is. We would love to have somebody to blame all the time.
Okay.
You know, it makes me think, years and years ago, I was speeding.
Okay.
I got pulled over, and I had to go to court. And so I got there early. There was a lady next to me. We were discussing what we were there for while it was waiting to start. And we were both there for speeding. Her name came up first. She got up there and she said, not guilty. Okay, defective vehicle, and they moved her along with a very minor fine. Well, I thought, well, I know I was speeding, so I got up there and I said, guilty. The judge stops. He says, let's talk about this. So that sin thing kind of turns around, and all of a sudden something I agreed I was guilty of.
Okay.
Well, you really can't say that then. So he turns it around to where I had to plead not guilty. I said, but I did speed. He said, but you don't want to say that.
Okay. Yes,
So
Your Honor.
our whole world is kind of, in everything,
Right.
It's kind of skewed on how we think about everything, whether it be our health, whether it be illnesses, or our day-to-day lives.
Or our spiritual life.
And definitely our spiritual life.
Okay. When we understand, like we talked about last week, if you had joined us, the sin issue, it violates God's carefully designed laws for life. And it damages the sinner irrespective of any action taken by God. And as the result, death comes about if God doesn't intervene, which he did in a big way about 2,000 years ago on a wooden cross, right?
Exactly.
So I thought there was a really interesting question that was posed in the green section at the bottom, and we'll just look at that real quick and invite you to give your comment in the comment section of the Facebook feed as we look at this question. When someone gets sick, it's not a good start to assign blame. At the same time, why can understanding the cause of a sickness be, in some cases, a crucial step towards healing and recovery? I know there's some doctors in the room. So if I don't understand the cause, let's say I have, I don't know, a really bad cold, but you diagnose me as having pancreatic cancer, and you start treating me for pancreatic cancer. Is that going to help my very, very bad cold?
Probably not.
Okay.
When I read this, I think about, say, somebody that's smoking.
Okay.
I mean, there's something we can definitely see, we know,
Sure.
and understand that it causes health issues.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the cause of the sickness.
Okay.
The crucial step of going toward healing is quit smoking.
Right. Right.
But so many people know that's not what they see. So I think that is one of the things, the understanding of the cause. And not all sicknesses do we understand the cause.
So, with that said, how do we apply this to our spiritual life?
I think you have to have that spiritual life before you get into something like that.
Okay. Okay.
Because something like that, if you were a heavy smoker and you were seeing something come up, I don't know, maybe emphysema, for example.
Okay. A lot of people deal with that.
Right. Wouldn't it be best to know that stop smoking and go to God, that please heal me? You know, and that doesn't mean that you're going to be healed of the emphysema right then, but that doesn't mean that God's not listening either.
Right.
And that's the important part that we need to remember, that just because we ask, if we don't see it happen right then, that's not a sign that God doesn't hear us.
I think that's well said. God's always listening.
And sometimes it's a wait.
And sometimes, yes, sometimes it is a wait and see, right? Patience. Patience. God is the ultimate, He has the ultimate patience. If you look at the Bible and all the stories that are there, you can see, and it's demonstrated for us, right? So the stories of the Bible, to me, really speak to and help me understand better than a platitude like God is love.
Right.
Right? So
That's just a pat answer.
Right. Right.
We know God is love. Let's go in more depth. What is God, you know?
What does that look like?
Yeah.
What does that look like for me? Spiritual healing, spiritual sickness. Going back to that question real quick, I think it's crucial that we know the root cause of it and not just try to placate or deal with the symptom, right? So often people, you know, whether growing up or whatever have you, they always, well, don't do that. You're not supposed to do that. Why are you doing that? Right? And they're always focused on the outward action, the outward, however that sin in your life or my life was manifesting itself, right? But really looking at the root cause. And again, nobody might know that other than you and God, and relying on Him to help fix that, and He will definitely help you with that.
Like you said, the don't do that, not that this is a sin, but when you tell a child, don't touch that stove, if you don't go to the next part of that and say, because you'll be burned,
right?
What are they going to do?
Giving them understanding of the reality, not just mom has a rule, don't touch the hot stove, right?
Don't smoke, you're going to get emphysema and lung cancer, you know?
Right. So let's move on to Monday's lesson. We could run down that rabbit trail for a while. So the lesson in Monday's lesson, it points out that oftentimes we don't consider it an illness until we have symptoms, okay? So going back to this idea of symptoms, many times people believe the symptoms are the problem, and they only seek for symptom relief instead of actually being cured. Going back to your idea of smoking, right? right? So you get lung disease due to smoking. And instead of quitting, maybe, they want to go after some kind of medication or they want oxygen. So they can alleviate the symptom, but still be in that practice that's deteriorating and going to eventually kill their health, right?
Or blame the smoking company, or blame the, it goes down the road.
Right, exactly. So again, seeking that idea of seeking symptom relief over fixing the root cause.
Right.
So why do we have pain in our life?
Because of sin.
Okay.
God didn't design pain in the beginning.
Okay. So that's not part of his original design,
No.
but it does serve a purpose, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pain is really designed to tell you something's wrong,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you feel pain somewhere in your body, hopefully your first thought isn't, oh, I have a pain disorder. I have a pain condition. I need to go and get, I'm lacking morphine in my diet because I have a pain condition, right? Is that how we handle health? Okay?
Some might.
Well, yeah, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's taking care of the root problem. But I'm hoping that you out there listening understand that I'm drawing these odd lines of thinking to get us to think about how this applies to our spiritual life. So, hopefully, when something's wrong that causes us pain, we look to fix the problem that's causing the pain. Think about maybe you got a thorn in your foot, right? Instead of overdosing on ibuprofen, if you remove the thorn, you probably remove the cause of the pain. Cavity in your tooth, maybe.
Yeah.
Fracture in your leg or your bone, your arm. Sprain in some joint somewhere. And the older I get, the more I understand that problem. So,
I like what it brought out, though, in the lesson when it was talking about the paralytic on Monday. Jesus went straight to the root of what was bothering the man the most.
mm-hmm.
And that was the guilt and the weight of his separation from God.
Yeah.
It wasn't that he wasn't walking.
No. Melanie makes a great point. We have to pray for guidance. No human can give that. And I think that's an important point to remember. Laura also makes a great comment. The contamination of our environment, water, food, air, play a role in promoting disease. And that is true in a physical sense, right? Then the question is, what promotes disease in a spiritual sense?
Lack of being with God, lack of inviting Him in.
Lack of spiritual food, right?
Exactly.
So
Isn't it interesting? And that one, if you're truly going to God, you don't get that distorted disease.
Keeping God with you, yeah, right.
Exactly.
Spiritual food, applying that to our spiritual lives. So, in other words, the contaminated food and water, so to speak, in a spiritual sense, might be destructive thought patterns, right?
Could very
Those
well.
negative thought patterns that, I forget the reference, but taking our thoughts captive to Christ, right? Maybe unhealthy family relationships could contribute to that.
Or just unhealthy relationships in general.
In general.
Whether it be family or not.
Does anything else come to mind for you, Sandy? Or those that are watching? A lack of relationship with God, maybe you kind of alluded to before. And even maybe...
And that said, that doesn't mean that as a Christian, as somebody who's got that relationship with God, that doesn't mean that you're going to be free from illnesses.
Right. No.
Because we live in a diseased, evil environment right now.
Yes.
We are prone to that.
What if we constantly, speaking in the spiritual sense now, what if we constantly expose ourselves to fear-based messaging? Do we see that in the world today?
Oh, a lot.
Okay.
A lot.
Or
Then you kind of go down that path again where you're all of a sudden your whole focus is turned inward.
yes. And it goes back to something you had talked about last week about taking our problems back, right?
Mm-hmm.
So often, and I'm guilty of this just the same as anyone, where you pray and ask God to help you deal with whatever it is that you're wanting help with. And you totally believe that, oh, I'm giving this up to God. But then a few weeks later, you find yourself right back where you started, all right?
It's like you start to think, well, he can't really handle it. I better work on it a while.
Yes.
Then
Yeah.
I'll let him work on it a little bit too.
Right.
Then back to me.
But again, back to this idea of trying to resolve issues in life without inviting the Lord in. He's a gentleman. He's not going to force his way
Right.
into having a relationship with you, but he wants to be invited in. So definitely want to do that.
And it brought out in Mondays too, he wants to cure the inside first. He wants to cure
Totally.
our spiritual maladies first.
If the root cause is remedied, is healed, the rest will follow.
Yeah.
It's when we get that backwards and we try to improve symptoms without the root cause, and it leads to bad things spiritually as well as in the physical realm, which helps us to understand how that happens in the spiritual realm.
You know, you see some people that come back from the war, for example, they've had a limb blown off or whatever.
Yeah.
You have two kinds of people. You either have the one who always dwells on the why did this happen to me, and you know, all the negative part of it. Then you have the other person that says, this is the best thing that could have happened to me because it's led me to a better spiritual life.
Yeah.
You know, you have it happen both ways.
Yeah, I've heard of people where they have something tragic in their life and it actually turns them around for the better in their spiritual walk, even though the physical is unhealable by human terms, right? So, yeah, good stuff. Tuesday's lesson. Seems like the day is flying by here. Tuesday's lesson, I want to look at, let's see here, the first 3 paragraphs, and I'll go ahead and read this. And again, this is where we're getting into this idea of depression, this very specific thing.
Okay.
So based on the data from the World Health Organization, the most common illness worldwide, affecting more than 300 million people each year, does not always have obvious, visible symptoms. Depression is the leading cause of disability worldwide and is a major contributor to world global burden of disease. Now that kind of struck me, and we'll talk about that in a bit, but unfortunately, often depression is not spoken about in Christianity because it can be seen as a sign of lack of faith, and you kind of alluded to that earlier in our conversation. After all, aren't Christians always supposed to be filled with joy and happiness and the like? So isn't depression a sign that something is wrong with our relationship with God? Most people know that this is not true, and I would reiterate, this is not true. Even Christians, faithful Christians, can at times struggle with depression, especially after a dramatic event. And it is not a sign of lack of faith or trust in God. Again, one can read the Psalms and see the pain, suffering, and anguish that God's people suffered. So, here we are. The title is Runaway. We're talking about depression, and I think that it was well said. Depression is not... It's not any more of a lack of faith than, I mean, if you were to take that stance, that's the stance the Pharisees had. And Christ proved that that is not the case. So let's not even entertain that thought. And if you have, please ask God to help you understand that. But depression has multiple factors, right? Just like any other disease process physically, in the physical body, as the mind. So I believe it's rightly pointing out that this is not a relationship with God issue. To say that it does, obviously, is the Pharisees' way of viewing it. Thoughts?
Well, and we know that a lot of depression has to do with imbalances
Mm-hmm.
in the body. Now, that's not something that maybe somebody can help.
Yeah.
I mean, you didn't bring it on sometimes by, you know.
Right.
For example, a mother that gives birth, there's a lot of them that go into a deep depression right afterwards. Now, that's
Mm-hmm.
not something she brings on herself. Here she has a new little bundle of joy
Sure.
and this deep depression. So we see it's imbalances in something inside of us.
Okay. So chemical
Sometimes
imbalances,
temporary,
as
sometimes long-term.
Melanie Dunham said, a chemical imbalance can cause that, right?
Yes.
So there's multiple factors. The lesson goes on to talk about Elijah and his depression after Mount Carmel. Now, I am not a doctor. Sandy's not a doctor. But to me, it doesn't seem that Elijah was suffering from depression in the strictest sense of the word.
Well, that's interesting that you brought that up, because when I read through this, I thought, depression. That what first got me was fear.
Yes.
Okay, fear is an unpleasant feeling that's triggered by a perception of danger or imagined.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, that's to me more what this was alluding to than depression.
Yeah.
Until you get to the part later down the road. So
Sure.
does that mean that maybe fear could then trigger?
Maybe. Certainly, he had a depressed outlook. I'll give him that. Like, things were not looking bright.
Right.
He was dealing with some very heavy realities, right?
Mm-hmm.
He might have had some of the symptoms, so to speak, okay, that one might call depression, such as not sleeping well, lack of appetite, those things, and worry, right? Fear and worry can have a physical toll on you, but the motivation to run away and had the energy to, what did it say? Something about a day's trip into the wilderness, right?
Yes.
If I've been around people that are, I would consider to be more on the depressed side, like their lack of motivation, their lack of will in life, that I don't see here in Elijah. And again, that is my very unprofessional view of this story, right? But the key point that I walked away from, again, these Bible stories, helping to understand how God deals with us in different life situations, the one thing I walked away from was the fact that running from God never brings you rest.
No.
No matter what frame of mind you're in. Running from God, again, never brings you rest.
And isn't it amazing to think that we could run from God?
Elijah's not the only one in the Bible.
Right, he's not.
You know, look at Jonah.
And it comes down to us nowadays.
Yeah.
You know, we think we can run from God at times.
At times. Hopefully we don't land in the belly of a fish, though, when it comes to that, right?
You never know what's ahead.
So, yeah. So again, you know, we might suffer some of the symptoms, and some people listening might be suffering, but it's on you to really go and reach out for help. Not only from God, but that he would lead you to people that can help you with the major depression, the clinical diagnosis, and I encourage you to get that professional help. But looking at the practical application, when we look at the story of Elijah going through what he went through and how he was handling it, how he was handling his mood, his outlook, and running away from it, was this based on logic and thinking about the situation, or was it irrational fears and negative thought patterns?
More the irrational, because
Okay.
depression is a feeling of severe despondency.
Mm-hmm.
It triggers self-doubt,
Hopelessness.
hopelessness, and all of that. Then it just snowballs into depression.
Yeah. And I've had all of those in my life, but you don't stay there. Like, my understanding of the little bit that I know about it, like if you're clinically depressed, this is something that goes on for weeks, like not just a moment in time, but weeks and months, right? So, what contributes to this? Again, could we remedy this in ways that we often promote in our denomination?
Well, we really promote the health benefits.
Right.
And
Diet, exercise
yeah,
plays a part. Choices of people that we choose to hang around.
yeah.
You know, look at Job, right? His own wife and his friends.
And maybe
Or-
that diet was, I
Right.
mean, exercise was part of it because God sent him on some, quite a trek.
Okay, what about things that contribute to it? Maybe things we choose to read, choose to
Absolutely.
watch, choose to listen to.
I think our choices make a huge part in it.
Okay. Now, from a spiritual aspect, though, that's kind of physical, but from a spiritual aspect, how might we resolve the root cause as we keep talking about?
Well, I think we've kind of talked about that.
Mhm.
You know, first of all, seeing it,
Okay.
understanding what's going on.
Right?
Second, definitely to go to God.
Okay.
And then seek help.
Yeah. Seeking biblical truth to dispel any lies that the Satan is trying to tell you about ourselves or about God, right? Seeking the Bible. The Bible is a guide, right?
Yes.
The Holy Spirit is a guide. Reconciliation with maybe people we know, or reconciliation with God, and that can be between you and God, right? Truly repenting and getting your relationship right there.
You know, if you think about what right now today, the things that are going on in our world, I mean, we've dealt with the COVID thing for over a year.
Right?
And the lockdowns, the masking,
Okay.
you know, back and forth. And then, you know, if you stay tuned into the TV all the time, then
Right.
you're being inundated with the Afghan issues
Okay.
and what's going on there. And
Fear-based messaging.
fear-based messaging. The same thing if you watch the weather all the time and you see everything going on. Those are things that if you are not tuned into God can really lead you down that depression trail.
Most certainly.
And yeah, it can pull you down because you can begin to think, what's next, you know? What's going to happen to me?
The lesson this week is rest, or free to rest, right? Rest through healing. And so we talked a little bit about last week forgiveness, all right? So forgiving others is important. Those that we feel have wronged us, whether those people feel they did something wrong to us or not, right? Forgiving others.
And they may not even know.
Right.
But if it's something that you're carrying
Sure.
all the time and you have that, all it's doing is destroying your health.
Most definitely. But again, forgiving others, just to be clear, it doesn't mean that what the other person did was right.
Absolutely.
Or that they're okay with doing it again, right?
Yeah.
So forgiveness, an important aspect of spiritual healing for spiritual rest.
Forgiveness changes you.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that if I forgave you for something, that changes me.
Yes.
That doesn't mean that you have changed.
Christ forgave those that were putting him on the cross, but it didn't necessarily change them.
Right.
Right? So, again, our world today, as you've alluded to, is becoming even more godless. Ever more worldly and justifying the need to punish the wrongdoer, seeking so-called justice through man-made systems, which is really the opposite of how God's system is built. Instead, we see, even though we see more injustice, our ways of thinking and not holding wrongs against others and really living as close to heaven as possible now, not this far off distance destination, so to speak.
I think too, if our focus is always on Jesus and what he's done for us,
Yeah,
what he's doing for us, and what he is going to do for us,
definitely.
we won't get sucked into that dark hole.
Again, dispelling the lies that the devil tries to throw at you. The wrong things that you might have done in your life, he will bring up over and over and over again to try and discourage you, right? To have you let go of God, because God's never let go of you, okay?
And this example, this story about Elijah that's in the lesson this week is a perfect example, because God doesn't condemn him.
Yeah. Nope.
He doesn't condemn him for, as the lesson brought out, his depression. He doesn't condemn him for running away.
Nope.
Instead, he comes along with him and he draws him back.
Again, evidence of how God deals with people in real life situations. Let's go ahead and jump to Wednesday's lesson as we're running out of time. Read 1 Kings, if you would, Sandy. 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 4, and then I'm going to read a little paragraph here in the lesson.
1 Kings 19:4. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he prayed that he might die and said, "It is enough now, Lord. Take my life, for I am no better than my fathers."
So this is Elijah speaking. When Elijah finally was still, this is the second paragraph on Wednesday's lesson, guilt came crashing in on him. He realized that his quick exit had hijacked what could have been a great opportunity for reformation in Israel. He realized that he had disappointed those who needed him, and he was powerless to do anything about it. Thus, in a painful moment of self-reflection, knowing full well the history of his people, he saw himself for what he really was. That can be a painful revelation for any one of us. That is, seeing ourselves as we really are. How grateful we should be for the promise that sinful as our lives have been in Christ, God will see us as he sees Jesus.
But the important part here, he did all of that you said. But what did he do? He prayed that he might die. So he went to God.
He did.
He went to God. Maybe not with what, he should have.
It might have not been aligned with God's purpose at that time, but he definitely went to God and asked for that. But again, this idea of a crisis came. There's strong emotions, right? Human emotions, they can be very strong. Christ experienced those. He had physical fatigue, and he had to make a choice. Now, the choice he made afterwards, the mind is judging that choice, and obviously in his self-reflection, he's feeling like he got it wrong, and guilt and disappointment comes in.
Well, and if we go back, why is he there in the first place?
Right? Because of fear.
Because of fear. Fear of Jezebel and what she's about to do.
Yeah.
So, the fear, the guilt, the lack of faith, instead of saying, hey, God, you put me in this position here to begin with, now what are you going to do about it?
And sometimes in a tough spot, we make a snap decision, right? And hold ourselves accountable. We might feel guilt over that, right? Even though we might have known in a very calm, tranquil environment, we might have known and chosen a different path. But again, the devil likes to overwhelm.
Oh, yes.
And cause us to react instead of being proactive, right? So, again, we touched on this. The dominant feeling was fear, right? And in a moment, that fear or lust or anger can typically have us make poor decisions in real time, right? Which result in all this guilty.
Almost always make those poor decisions.
Yeah, exactly. So, in our nation today, we have a lot of people that have bought into this idea that they should trust their feelings. Your feelings should be trusted. Why is this a dangerous position to hold, and do we have any biblical evidence to say to the contrary, to push back on that? Let's look at Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 9. Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 9. And
this is a very good one for that.
Okay.
Jeremiah 17:9.
Yes.
The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it?
Okay. So that verse, we don't want to trust our heart, right?
Those feelings, yeah.
Those feelings, right? So I'm going to look at James chapter 1, verse 6 through 7 real quick. James chapter 1, verses 6 through 7. Again, looking at the biblical evidence as to why we should not be trusting our feelings. But let him ask in faith with no doubting. For he who doubts is like a wave of the sea driven and tossed by the wind. For let not that man suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. So again, this doubting, fear.
Doesn't that describe us in times?
And people that are unbalanced in their mind, maybe not for any other reason than the chemical imbalance in their brain, might have a wash of feelings that if they were to act upon them or take any action on those feelings, it will definitely be the wrong ones, right? Again, relying on Christ to lead and guide our path. So feelings can lie. The fact is, Satan tempts us with feelings to see. To see this, we saw it in the garden, right? And with Jesus, tempted in all ways that we are. But feelings, I will say, feelings are not facts and should not be viewed as such. They are not truth. In society today, Satan is definitely out to deceive and make the perception that feelings are truth. And the couple of verses that we read, and I'm sure there's many more that I didn't get to, but that is not the case.
Right. And Satan works overtime to, if he can get you convinced that, you're so bad, not even God wants to hear you.
Right.
And when you're in that depressed state, those are the kinds of things that you think, that I'm so bad, not even, like he said, I'm like my fathers, I'm just so down and depressed.
That's a lie that has come all the way from Eden. We can see by Adam and Eve's reaction to what was taking place that he'd already told them the lie that they had gone too far. Like, you're in trouble now, and oh boy, he's coming to get you.
Right.
And so they ran and hid because of fear that was definitely fanned by the devil.
Right.
And they had just that quick. They had they walked with God in the cool of the day. Like
daily.
Face to
Daily.
face. And that quick, sin had changed their perspective of God, that they were running from him.
Yeah, so if we think it couldn't happen to us,
we
wake
are
up.
fooling ourselves.
That's right.
For sure. I think it's in, Wednesday's lesson. How are we doing on time? Let's skip that. And let's look at Thursdays. In the second paragraph, it states, and I'll read that real quick. It says, entering to God's rest has to do with healing, with slowly unlearning negative thought patterns and destructive habits. Thoughts?
Entering into his rest has to do with healing?
Yeah.
I agree. I think when we go to him first, the healing definitely begins.
Mm-hmm.
Now, whether we're expecting that physical healing, but the spiritual healing begins.
Spiritual healing always happens 100% of the time if we
says
cooperate.
He always forgives.
Yes.
And all of the instances in the Bible where people came to him, he always forgave them.
Yeah.
He always healed them.
Yeah. I just really like this sentence because I think it drives home the point of the whole lesson, really. And it really takes us past or helps us view what God is trying to do for each one of us, right? It's so why do you think why does it take time to win a person to trust? Why couldn't God have simply just used his divine power, demonstrated it, and overwhelm you to the point that resistance is futile? Does that heal a person's heart?
No, we still have to have that choice.
Okay. I mean, there's stories in the Bible like God passing by Moses, right? And how that affected Moses, and he didn't even see God like face to face in that
Right.
moment. So God doesn't want to scare us into compliance. He doesn't want us to choose him because, oh my goodness, I'm going to be evaporated if I don't, right? He wants us to take time to unlearn the negative thoughts and the destructive habits. That, for some people, is fairly quick. I've heard of people that quit smoking cold
Sure.
turkey or give up their destructive thinking very quickly. For others, it takes more time. Everybody each to his own, and the Lord
And-
knows what you need.
And for others, they battle it most of their life.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It goes on to, let's look at Romans 14:5, but it's this idea that a person convinced against their will is of the same opinion still. Romans 14:5.
14:5. One person esteems one day above another. Another esteems every day alike. Let each be fully convinced in his own mind.
So how does that apply to this idea of healing? Genuine healing is of the heart, right?
Right.
Of the mind, soul, and character, and it requires a full participation by you, the individual. It's not something that he can force upon you.
It's
right?
interesting that they use this text because it's referencing actually the Sabbath, but it's also the law of liberty. So, yeah.
In the same way, if you were to go to the emergency room and you're conscious enough to give consent, they have to get that from you.
Right.
They can't save you against your will, so to speak. Okay? So the same applies for anything you see going on in the world today. In a spiritual sense, God gives us a choice to participate, and we, again, have to be persuaded, as it says in King James, I think, persuaded in our own minds.
Right. I thought it was interesting, too, on Thursday where it brought out that God's rest is not a one-time event.
Yeah.
You know, think of how many times over and over and over he answers our prayers.
Yep.
And that spiritual healing occurs over and over.
We have to reach out to God. We have to choose truth. We have to choose trust and align ourselves with God's help, obviously, but with his design laws, not only the physical ones, but the spiritual ones as well.
Right.
We don't have the power to fix it. We don't have the power to heal ourselves or transform ourselves, just like we can't go and do open heart surgery on ourselves, right? So I don't know if anybody's tried that, but I know it's probably not going to work out too well, right? So again, spiritually speaking, though, let's not try to do open heart surgery on ourselves, right? Let's go to the one that has the ability and the resources to heal us, but participate in that. Because if you were going for open heart surgery, you would have to choose the doctor, choose the facilities, right? You would have to make choices along the way. But so again, this idea of choosing is throughout the Bible. God came to the cross 2,000 years ago to give you the ability to choose him willingly, without coercion, without threat.
And I think that goes to our lesson now, where the angel came to him and told him to go, you know, what to do. There's that choice. He didn't have to.
No.
He could have laid there and just withered away.
Withered away, wallowed in his own self-pity.
Right.
However you want to.
But he recognized that this message was from God. And I think sometimes when we, in prayer, do we always recognize God's answers? Or are we so focused on the negativity or the
or like
issue
Jonah.
that we're dealing with, do we not hear what God's telling us?
Yeah, or like Jonah. You know, he was put in time out in the belly of a fish. Sometimes we maybe need to be put in time out, right?
Right.
Give us perspective.
Exactly.
But opening our heart to God, we can receive divine help. We can receive divine light and guidance for growth in a spiritual sense. The last paragraph on Thursday's lesson, it says, God knew that better days lie ahead for Elijah. Healing would come for the prophet as he would learn to regulate his life by God's rhythms and accept his rest. I think that really spoke to the idea that we have to allow ourselves to trust God with the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
God knew what was ahead for Elijah. He knows what's ahead for you and I, right? So not, taking action when told to take action. Like you said, he could have just laid there, said,
Right.
"Nope, I don't believe you. I'm kicking back. We're gonna sit this one out," right?
Mm-hmm.
But he kind of snapped out of it and was willing to then take on what God was calling him to do. So, anything else on Thursday's lesson as we close?
Well, I really liked at the very end of Thursday where it says, for Elijah, there would be no desperate death under a broom tree,
Okay,
lay there and wither and die,
right?
but rather a fiery chariot ride to heavenly rest.
Yeah.
And
So God knew what he had, the plans
there was
he
a
had
plan,
for
yeah.
him.
I know the
What is
plans
that?
I have for you.
Jeremiah 29:11,
Yes.
right? So definitely God is for us. God is working towards and for your healing, and it is our job to invite him in and accept that in our life to really bring rest despite any of the circumstances.
And this
that
is a
might be
perfect
happening.
example to know that God has something in mind for us. We don't know what it is,
Right.
just like he didn't know.
Yeah. No, he didn't.
But when we follow through with what God is telling us to do, he has everything in mind for us. And it's always to our benefit.
Always to our benefit. Well said. Let's go ahead and have a closing word of prayer. I want to thank you all for joining us here on Facebook, as well as YouTube, if that's where you're watching. Thank you for your participation today. Enjoy your comments. I will get back and read those. And let's join me in prayer, will you? Heavenly Father, thank you for your Sabbath day. Thank you for the rain that we've had, the sun that we've had. Thank you for your blessings that you've given each one of us. And may we continue to grow in you, learning who you really are and the plans that you have for us. Go with us this week and help us to reflect you to others. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.